My name is Stephanie G. I'm a native San Franciscan, and I'm a dentist, and I practice out in the Sunset. And I'm currently living in Forest Hill. From what I can remember back, we lived on Sacramento Street and Hyde in a flat. And I went to Reading School at that time. But in 1966, our family my parents were expecting the fourth child, and so my grandmother gave them $7,000 down for the down payment on a $32,000 home on 15th and Taraval, and my mom just passed away last week, but they still occupied that home. When we moved there out to the Sunset, then I started going to West Portal School. When we lived on 15th Avenue in that single family home, there were 2 other Asian families on that block. And I think back in the 60s, there was more of a sense of neighborhoods and playing with the kids who are on your block. And so all the kids on the block played with each other, and then we would be out in the afternoon, and then we would go home either at 5 o'clock or when the sun went down, or if we heard that our parents had dinner ready. So when I went to West Portal School, there were only 10 Asian kids in the whole community, in the whole school. And so I really did very much feel like a minority. And I do remember that my dad always told me that the only way that I could succeed is if I was better than everyone else. So he always wanted me to be the smartest kid. So that was like the goal. That since my dad was an immigrant. But anyway, back then, the Asian kids really kept to themselves, and I guess I missed when there were more Asians in my life. But as I got older and I went to middle school and high school, there were more people who were like me. And even when I went to college and dental school, I was always a minority, either because I was a woman or I was Asian. And so I never knew that the reason why there weren't so many Asians out in the Sunset and the Parkside was that there was a law that Asian people couldn't live there. But anyway, I ended up getting a practice out here in the neighborhood that I grew up pretty much. And even at that time, because I purchased the practice from a white dentist, I felt like there was going to be a problem because I was a woman and an Asian person. But that dentist took a liking to me and really trusted me. And so I'm really grateful, because I realized later that he was a businessman out here, but he really grew up in a very white world. So for him to be open-minded about a woman dentist taking over his practice, I thought was really big of him, and I feel really grateful for that. And shortly after getting my practice here, I purchased a home in Forest Hill. And one thing that was really unusual about purchasing that home was the seller was actually living next door to this home in Forest Hill and was Chinese. And so actually it was one of the first times in my life that being Asian, being Chinese worked in my favor, because he found out that I was Chinese and I was a dentist. And so I think he was pretty motivated to make the deal. And it's kind of interesting. his daughter lives next door now, and there's an Asian family that actually is moving in across the street, and then there was a home also across the street for sale, and my neighbor, she told me she was hoping an Asian person would buy it, but it's changed so much, because also Forest Hill in their bylaws also had a section where they did not allow Asian people to buy. And I even understand that, I think Willie Mays, because he had a home in Forest Hill, and it wasn't easy for him to get that house in Forest Hill. But I'm glad somehow it happened for him. I think probably at that time there were neighborhood schools, so it was likely that whoever was on your block went to school with you. I think housing in general was maybe more affordable, and there were more families. The other thing that has happened over the years in the city is that way back then, I would say there weren't too many working mothers, so there were a lot of stay-at-home moms, and that allowed kids to not be in after-school care. They went home, and so playing with the kids on the block was something that everybody did, because all the moms really kind of established that community. And it's interesting when I think back, because there wasn't so much crime, and so I do remember like we left windows open and sometimes our doors unlocked, and way back then, because I live in Forest Hill now, and when I moved there, I did the same thing. It's not that I left my doors unlocked, but I left my windows open, and so we've been burglarized like twice, and we've lived there 23 years. So, and now we have an alarm system, and I'm learning that it's a very well-to-do neighborhood, but there is crime, and I would say every homeowner has an alarm. But I think, as I said, getting back to why there's not that sense of community is that, I think more it has to do with that there are a lot of working parents, and what kids do after school is totally different. For instance, I'm a working parent, and when my daughter was growing up, I was constantly looking for after school care and summer camps. I was not home to entertain kids. Actually, we moved in June of 1966, and the one thing was back then, in the Nob Hill area, it's sunny, and so when we moved out here, it was foggy every day. And I remember after the first week, my mom was walking us home from school, and I asked her is it gonna be foggy like this every day, and it was. And I even have a picture in one of my operatories of San Francisco in fog, because it reminds me of that day that I asked her about that. The other thing is that when we lived in Nob Hill area, we lived near the Polk Street area, which is really, it's really dense down there, and it was really happening, kind of a really neat place to shop and, walk to. When we came out here on Terraville, there was a whole bunch of car dealerships, and also I think all of a sudden we were in a neighborhood that was not as Asian, so I think it was just strange to us. Well, I grew up in a really close-knit family. My mother was the youngest of like 13, and when we were growing up, we all had a Sunday dinner at my grandmother's house, and she lived on Broadway, just up from Chinatown. everybody lived in the city at that time, and all my cousins, I think there were 25 of them, stayed in the Bay Area. But now my cousins' kids mostly can't even afford to live in San Francisco. So they're all spread out. I think the other thing, even from a college perspective, a lot of my cousins and I, we attended local universities, mostly either City or SF State or Berkeley. And so, the admissions, it's very difficult to get admitted to Berkeley now. So actually none of the kids really go to even university nearby. So we're just all really, really spread out. I think the other thing that I'm seeing just in my patient pool is when I first started practicing here in 1996, the patients I had were like a lot of teachers, a lot of people who work for PG&E, firemen, policemen, muni drivers, and I think there was this ability for blue-collar workers to afford homes out here. So almost everybody was a homeowner out here. And even, the school teachers, I have a number of school teacher families that on a two school teacher salary, some of these families own 2 homes. It was unusual. But now, the teachers come from far away, and so the next generation is not able to live here unless they really would want to live here. And some do actually scrape by and get very creative about financing to stay here, but it's not easy. I would say that actually, because I had that base of the blue-collared workers who were homeowners, who also had really good dental insurance, dental benefits, that they were able to do the work. Now it's harder. It's harder, but I would say there is still a lot of wealth in San Francisco, so there are still a lot of patients who can afford the work. And certainly fees are always in my discussion when I talk with patients. I would say that another factor, which is probably unrelated to this whole story, is that the insurance reimbursement is a lot less compared to what my fees are now. And so the patients have to make up that difference. I think also the cost of running my business, meaning the salaries that I have to pay, impacts what my fees are, and it impacts the fee structure of anybody running a business in San Francisco is salaries. I do think that in certain sectors, such as the teaching and the fire department, the police department, for city services, that they should have housing, so that there's not so much of a burden for people to live so far away. Because I think when you have this incredible cost to live here, then you're not able to attract good talent, because I think, for instance, UCSF is a really well-renowned medical facility, research really cutting edge, very difficult to attract good postdocs because initially they're not actually getting paid that much, but also they have to find housing. At that point, they might be in their late 20s, early 30s. They're starting families, and they might be having kids. Not easy for them, and if you want them to stay, there's got to be some incentive. So I think that would really help a lot. I think also, actually, which this is probably, I think I'm seeing a lot of homeowners that their kids are inheriting the housing. It's one way of making it affordable for the next generation to stay. I'm not saying that's necessarily fair to help the people who want to stay here, but if there was some incentives, but definitely I think that they lose really good teachers because there's other places to live. One thing I would say about San Francisco is, because I'm still here and I want to stay here, and my daughter, actually, we're going to close on a condo, and we're helping her buy it, mostly because she's expressed interest in staying, but also because I've seen people move out of the city to follow their kids wherever they are, because this is it becomes a necessity, I think, when you get to an advanced age, is you want to be close to your family. So to lock in that my daughter could be close to me and that I don't have to chase her around the country or the world, I helped her. I think, though, that you have a lot of workers who are commuting really long distances, and it's still a desirable place to be, but I think that the service workers can only exist if they can have housing. Well, I think actually, if they help the policemen and firemen, that they would get workers. I think also even the muni drivers, because I take public transportation. Although I think eventually the workers find themselves there, and the teachers that I'm seeing in the schools, that they're always short teachers. It seems to me like everything on the west side is pretty good. I think, because I've thought about this, that I always think that in the Richmond near Clement would be probably one of the nicest places to live, because it's pretty flat and the weather's pretty good. So a person who didn't have a car could have access to just so much. That kind of stands out to me, because it's not hilly, and there's some good bus lines like the California bus. The Geary is really taking you downtown. You've got sun, so I would say that the Richmond probably has the best. Well, what's interesting is I've heard, because I was looking at condos that had an elevator, and I guess because my parents, who just passed on, there were two issues about them staying in their house. One was that their bathroom was totally not accessible, and there were these stairs. So for my daughter, I chose a condo that has an elevator, and actually I'm going to convert one of the bathrooms into a walk-in shower. Now, I think if you had those kind of condos that were like around, and then this is a condo that's, the banks, there's two banks or three banks within a 3-block radius. She's got 3 banks. She's got a Safeway. She's got two really good Chinese stores, a Chinese bakery, Walgreens, and a pizza place, and the library. Oh, and 3 blocks away from a public swimming pool. If you have that kind of thing. Another condo community that I was looking at, I think there's condos near H Mart, which I thought there's a bank, and there's a big H Mart. If you have those kind of communities, or like, I think out in South City where they've got condos, and then they've got like this big Pacific Super, and then a whole Walgreens. Thinking about that, but thinking about accessibility, not just for wheelchair access, but for the aging community, is really something important. I would say, having had like the last 7 or 8 years being a hands-on caregiver, because I recently remodeled one of my bathrooms to be a walk-in shower, so like to think like I could stay a little bit longer, because when you get to that point where you're you can't walk the stairs anymore, you're in denial that you even need help. You certainly wouldn't even like think about putting grab bars in your bathtub. So yeah, you could be proactive, but when I talk to my friends about whether they're proactive about it, they're not, until they kind of can see that access is really important. I think we did a lot of the Park and Rec programs, and like it's kind of funny. Like I was giving my receptionist some advice about like logging in March on a Saturday to get the programs, and I'm like, okay, make sure you have an account ready, and you've got a couple of computers, and even if you try and log in for 15 minutes, don't give up. And like it's such craziness. Like maybe if they could expand on it to make it so that like people can get those really inexpensive programs. I think the other thing is like I guess there's BMR housing, and actually I heard that it's a really hard lottery system. Like how can you like make it so like a lottery? But you know what? I have 2 patients that actually won the lottery, so I'm happy for them. And I just think, wow, they're just so lucky. But maybe if they were able to kind of expand on that idea, that's I think something that those 2 things. I guess the small businesses, and this the sense of community, or like seeing the same people every day, but it's the small businesses. I mean, I grew up in such a white world that I don't speak Chinese well, but at one of the Chinese markets, the owner's, he makes me speak Chinese every time I go in. He's kind of teaching me Chinese, and so I don't know, that's very special. And so I think it's the small businesses where you have that sense of community. I think that's also actually why I find San Francisco's so much more interesting than, I guess you could live anywhere in USA, but what makes San Francisco so interesting is the neighborhoods and how unique they are. I think one comment I would make, I think trying to make housing more affordable by putting up some really outrageous high-rise condominiums is kind of like strange that projects like that even get considered. Like, because I think that if you are able to allow new housing that's kind of like kind of contiguous with what's already there, it's really be better than, letting some developer put up a big high-rise, because I think the residents wouldn't like it. I don't know how easy it is to subdivide or condoize apartments, maybe, and I know that there are TICs too, and I don't understand that the housing laws very well, but allowing properties to be somewhat subdivided is something that, could make it easier for there to be housing within the housing that's already here. I've seen the city kind of go through its ups and downs, and I think that right now is a real down time. I guess there seems to be a lack of law. There seems to be a lawlessness here that needs to be under control, and if people don't feel like it's very safe, then it's not a good thing. I think also that I think actually at the top, the mayor has to be more of a deal maker as far as like bringing in new business. Because there was a time when tech wanted to be here, and I'm sure there's a way to attract maybe a different sector here. But I think you have to be a bit of a deal maker to for that to happen. I think also, anyway, there are always these ups and downs, and that even though this is a downtime, I think there will always be opportunistic business types that are still thinking of being in San Francisco, and I think our very favorable climate has a lot to do with that.